Hello and welcome to another episode of Legion by the Numbers. My name is Joe Eames, and in this episode we're going to be looking at the Z6 and why the RPS-6 is potentially superior in pretty much every scenario, and why you might consider or should potentially consider not taking the Z6 and taking the RPS-6. With the Phase 1 clone troopers, it's almost automatic. Everybody's taking the Z6 almost all the time. We're going to go through and show why the RPS-6 is actually superior in a lot of ways. So first off, let's just look at some basics of them. The Z6 is 23 points, the RPS-6 is 21 points, so 2 points cheaper. That's great. At the cost that we're looking at, 85 versus 83, not really a make it or break it in your army, but still it matters. The Z6 is range 3 with your 6 white dice, where the RPS-6 is range 2 to 4 with a single rainbow. So good about the RPS-6, you actually have a range 4 attack. Bad about the RPS-6, you have no range 1 attack. You don't fight a lot in range 1 and do shooting with your Phase 1 clones a lot at range 1. I certainly haven't in my games, so I don't think that's very much of a drawback. The one thing that is a huge drawback is the cumbersome. So this by itself, that cumbersome is probably the one reason to consider actually sticking with the Z6 instead of the RPS-6. Why that might actually be superior is just because of the cumbersome. If you have a good bid and you're having a lot of objectives that require a lot of movement, the Z6 is actually going to matter here because you can move into range and attack, and there's a big difference in damage between having the Z6 or just having the one black die from your trooper because you can't use the RPS-6. But it doesn't tap, it's not exhaustible, and it has the impact too. In this meta with all the armor that we've got, that impact is such a huge deal. So putting all these things together, and when we look at the statistics to look at the damage, we're going to see that the RPS-6 is probably a better weapon than the Z6. So let's head over to the dice simulator. Again, we're using the Legion Builds dice simulator. I built this. You can always run these scenarios on your own, open this up, play around with it, try other scenarios to see what things work better. But I'm going to go through here and we're going to look at the Z6 and the RPS-6 and how they do against each other. So first, let's start off with the Z6. So clone troopers start with 4 units. We're going to obviously have the additional one, so we're going to have 5 black and 6 white. For our Z6 unit, they don't surge to anything, but we're going to give them the aim token, assuming that they're aiming and firing, which is a really common scenario with your sort of gun line units like your Phase 1s. So let's go ahead and see what they do if they're shooting against B1s that aren't in cover. They're going to do about 4 1/3 points of damage with essentially a 0% miss chance. They really almost are never going to do 0 damage in that case. Now let's go to the RPS-6. The RPS-6 is a single rainbow, so that's 1 red. It's going to add another black and go down to just 1 white. Same thing, we're going to have the aim. Since we can't move and shoot, we're almost for certain going to aim and shoot unless we're really worried about them coming under attack and we dodge and shoot, but let's just go with the aim. White, no cover, no surge. We go from 4.3 to 4.3, 4.34 to 4.36. So there's actually a tiny bit of increase in damage. Now let's go back to those Z6s. If I just click on this column here, it takes me back to whatever those numbers were. It shows you what they were. And so now let's put our B1s. Let's go with like more rebels and doing 3.4 with the RPS-6. White search to block again, no cover, 3.49. So again, a little bit of an improvement. And finally back to the Z6s. Let's go with red, no surge. Doing 2.6, but with the RPS-6, red no surge, does, again, exactly the same 2.6. So in all cases, the RPS-6 is doing the same damage, if not better. Now let's go and look at what happens when we go to cover. Let's just go straight to heavy cover. So we're going to go start with those B1s again. White, no surge to block, heavy cover with the Z6, and we get 2.2 on average points of damage. Let's head over to the RPS-6, heavy cover, white, no surge to block. And that's going to be 2.7. We did this with surge to block. Let's rerun this for those B1s. It's not 2.2, it's 2.75. So about the same with the RPS-6 and heavy cover fighting B1s. Actually, RPS-6 is a little bit less damage. less fewer dice, fewer crits that can go through there. So a small change. So sticking with our Z6, let's go with white surge to block heavy cover. We already saw that. We're going to run this again just so we can line it up. 2.2. And then with the RPS-6, white surge to block 2.18. So essentially the same. And then finally with the Z6 red, no surge to block and heavy cover doing 1.65. And with the RPS-6 red, no surge, heavy cover 1.62. Practically the same damage profile. The miss chances are actually going down a little bit on the RPS-6 versus the Z6. So look at that. The RPS-6 is shooting at troopers is the same damage profile if you have an aim token. The aim isn't going to really make a much difference between the two different weapons. We can let's run these last two numbers. Let's get rid of the aim on the Z6 1.12. And with the RPS-6, we'll get rid of the aim and 1.08. So even though they both go down in damage pretty significantly, the relative difference between the two is pretty much the same. So now that we've got that put together, let's look at two more scenarios. One, if you're only shooting at range 4 with the RPS-6, is it worth it to even shoot at troopers? So at range 4, so here we can do something the Z6 can't even do. We can shoot at range 4 against troopers. Let's start with no cover, white, no block, just the RPS-6. So now we're just doing 1, 1, and 1. White, no block, we're doing 1.25. If it's rebels, 1 point of damage. And if it's a red save, 0.75. So in each case, you're doing about 1 point of damage. So if you could catch something out of cover, still worth it to shoot at it. If all you can do is use the RPS-6, let's do those same numbers, but with an aim against white surge to block. We go from 1.25 to 1.75 against that was no surge to block. With white surge to block, we're going from 1.0 to 1.4. And then against red, we're going from 1.4 to we're going from 0.75 to 1.05. So obviously having the aim makes a big difference. You're going to have that at range 4. So doing 1 to 1.75, 1.5, 1 3/4, depending on the defense die of the defender. If you catch them out of cover, really great. Now, what about the scenario where you have to move in order to shoot at them? In which case you're losing the RPS-6 and you're just getting the one black die out of that same trooper. So let's first go back to one of our Z6, and let's just pick like shooting at red and into heavy cover, and we're just going to compare this. So again, this does 1.12. Let's give them the aim. Or no, we're not going to have the aim because we have to move. So the Z6 does 1.12 if you have to move to get a shot on a red unit that's in heavy cover, whereas the RPS-6. So with the Z6, if we're using the RPS-6, we're not going to have any white dice. We're not going to have the red, but instead of that trooper, the RPS-6 trooper, using the RPS-6, which is a single rainbow, he's just going to be contributing one black die. So we're going to go to 6 red die. So instead of 1.12 with the Z6, we're now doing 0.67. So that is a pretty significant drop off. If you have to move, and this sort of ratio is going to hold against all the different profiles, shooting against something that isn't in cover versus shooting at something in cover and the different red dice, it's a pretty decent increase in damage. If you're forced to move with the RPS-6 and you actually lose the RPS-6, you get a pretty big damage fall off. Not surprising. We expected that, but it's also still isn't unrespectable quantities of damage. You have a 50% chance of missing against red and heavy cover. You had a third of a chance of missing against red and heavy cover with the Z6. With the RPS-6 trooper that isn't able to use the RPS-6 because of the cumbersome keyword, you're still probably doing a point of damage, about a 50-50 chance of doing a point of damage. Maybe occasionally doing 2, but probably just doing 1, 50-50 chance. So not as good as the Z6, but still okay. Where it shines is when it comes to shooting against armor. So let's go back to our Z6. We're going to give him the aim. We're going to go back with the aim. We're going to go with white, surge to block, no cover, but now armor. What happens when the Z6 shoots at armor? All right, we're doing 1.16 points of damage. Okay, let's go now to the RPS-6. We've got to go back a little ways here to find one of those. There we go. That's the RPS-6. And he needs the impact 2. We didn't have that on them. He's got the aim. We're going red with no block, or with surge to block, no cover, and armor. Whereas the Z6 was doing 1.1, the RPS-6 against that same armor unit is doing 2.8. So in a whole additional point of damage. What happens if we're shooting at range 4 and we're only able to use the RPS-6 on its own, but we're still able to aim and attack? We go from 2.6 down to 1.3. So that's a shot the Z6 can't even make. And the RPS-6 is doing more damage than any shot the Z6 can make against armor at range 4. You get inside of range 2 or 3, and against armor you're doing practically an extra point of damage. So a huge difference against armor. Let's go back and look at it with a red save instead of the white. The Z6 does 0.86 in that scenario. The RPS-6 is going to do 1.6, so double the chance of damage. And if it's shooting on its own against red, instead of doing 1 1/3, it's doing 1. So still for sure, practically for sure, doing a point of damage, about a 0.25% chance of a miss against a red save armor unit. But still a really great shot. RPS-6, significantly better than the Z6 for everything other than mobility. So if you're outfitting your armor, your armies, your clone armies, and you're looking at taking your phase 1s, and you're just by default going with the Z6, if you do have the minis and you've bought the upgrades and have them painted up, the RPS-6 is probably a better choice in just about every scenario other than a high mobility scenario. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, this episode of the Legion by the Numbers. If I missed anything, leave a comment, let me know. I can do another video to kind of cover more scenarios. If there's other scenarios you'd like me to cover, leave a comment, let me know. Be sure and like and subscribe. Really helps out. And thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in a future episode.